Those attorneys tell the presiding judge, Judge Merchan, that the law, quote, mandates the immediate dismissal, close quote, of Trump's 34 guilty verdicts for crimes he committed to try to cheat in the 2016 presidential election. Problem is, no law, quote, mandates, close quote, any such thing. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, there's a brand new court filing in Donald Trump's criminal case in New York. And like most other Trump court filings, this one is filled with inflammatory nonsense and stuff that sounds more like a campaign speech than a thoughtful legal submission. But this one is troubling for reasons other than the inflammatory BS it contains, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Let's start with the new reporting. This from the BBC. Headline, prosecutors back delaying Trump sentencing until he leaves the White House. And that article reads, in part, New York prosecutors have vowed to oppose President-elect Donald Trump's effort to overturn his criminal conviction, but they expressed a willingness to wait to sentence him until after he completes his upcoming presidential term. Prosecutors urged the judge who is overseeing Trump's sentencing after his guilty verdict to consider options other than dismissal, including holding off until the president-elect is scheduled to leave the White House in 2029. Now here's the part that refers to the new defense court filing. On Wednesday, attorney Todd Blanche called for the, quote, immediate dismissal of the case, close quote, and argued such an outcome was required by the U.S. Constitution and the Presidential Transition Act. Mr. Blanche asked for a deadline of 20 December to file a full brief with the court. Now, friends, let's go right to this new submission, this new court filing by Donald Trump's criminal defense attorneys. Here's how it starts. Dear Justice Merchan, immediate dismissal of this case is mandated by the federal Constitution, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, and the interests of justice in order to facilitate the orderly transition of executive power following President Trump's overwhelming victory in the 2024 presidential election. Here's the problem with that, friends. That is all a lie. How do we know it's a lie? Well, first of all, Donald Trump committed these 34 felony crimes, falsifying business records to cover up hush money payments, to try to cheat in and steal the 2016 presidential election. He committed all those crimes while he was a candidate for office, not a president of the United States. And friends, I invite you to read the Constitution. Read it a couple of times. Read it forward and backward. Nowhere in there, nowhere does it say, it is hereby mandated under the terms of the United States Constitution that if somebody commits crimes in violation of state law to try to cheat in and steal a presidential election, those cases, those guilty verdicts must be dismissed if that person is again elected president. So it's a lie that the Constitution mandates dismissal. Let's go to their second claim. The Presidential Transition Act of 1963 mandates that Donald Trump's 34 felony guilty verdicts be dismissed. No, it doesn't. Do you know what the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 says? You know what proposition it stands for? Here we go. Presidential Transition Act Summary. Introduction. In passing the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, Congress explained, Any disruption occasioned by the transfer of executive power could produce results detrimental to the safety and well-being of the United States and its people. To promote the orderly transfer of power, Congress established a framework for the federal government to prepare for a transition from one president to another. With strong bipartisan support, the Act has been amended over the years to recognize the increasing complexities of presidential transitions. The law requires, here we go, friends, the General Services Administration to provide office space and other core support services to presidents-elect and vice presidents-elect, as well as pre-election space and support to eligible candidates. The Act also requires the White House and agencies to begin transition planning well before a presidential election, benefiting both first and second-term administrations. You know what the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 doesn't mandate or say or even hint at? That somebody who committed 34 felonies as a candidate to try to steal a presidential election, in the event a jury finds them guilty of all 34 felony charges, and that person goes on to be elected again and become a president-elect, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 mandates dismissal of those 34 felony guilty verdicts. This is another variation on Donald Trump's often told lie that the Presidential Records Act lets him take classified documents and our nation's most closely guarded secrets to his club at Mar-a-Lago, steal them, unlawfully retain them, obstruct justice by refusing to give them back, and violating our nation's espionage laws. Donald Trump was forever saying the Presidential Records Act lets me do it. It doesn't. It actually provides the exact opposite. And yet now we have in this court filing Donald Trump's attorneys, put a pin in that, we're going to talk about that in a minute, saying the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, quote, mandates dismissal. But let's go to the third claim that mandates dismissal. The interests of justice. The interests of justice mandate dismissal. Where somebody committed all kinds of felony crimes in violation of state law to cheat in and steal a presidential election is convicted by a jury of his peers is pending sentencing, the interests of justice mandate, dictate, require that those guilty verdicts be dismissed rather than the convicted criminal, Donald Trump, being sentenced and punished for the crimes the jury found he committed. Yeah, that's what should be done in the interests of justice. They should all just be tossed out, and we should just go ahead and install a criminal president for the second term without any accountability or punishment for the crimes he committed to steal the presidency the first time around. Interests of justice. Now, let's turn to Donald Trump's lawyers, who authored and signed and submitted these statements, these false assertions that the Constitution and the Presidential Transition Act and the interests of justice mandate, demand, require, dictate that all 34 felony convictions just be tossed out. Well, this was submitted by and signed by his lead attorney, Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche, who Donald Trump has announced he intends to appoint as the number 2 person at the Department of Justice, the Deputy Attorney General, the Attorney General's right-hand man. Todd Blanche, who argued as Donald Trump's criminal defense attorney that the Constitution mandates something that it clearly does not mandate. That the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 mandates something that it clearly does not mandate, and that the interests of justice mandate something that the interests of justice clearly do not mandate. So let's finish with this, friends, maybe something of a question. If confirmed as the #2 person at the Department of Justice, the Deputy Attorney General, the DAG, as we call him. If confirmed, will he bring that same sound legal reasoning to his work on behalf of the American people that he, poured into that first sentence of this new Trump submission? I have to believe that Donald Trump has made the calculation in announcing that he will appoint to 3 of the highest positions at the Department of Justice. We're going to set aside the Matt Gaetz fiasco. We've been talking about that recently, and we'll talk about it more in the future, that he's going to try to push Matt Gaetz through as the Attorney General. 3 of the other highest posts, he named his 3 criminal defense attorneys. 3 of his many criminal defense attorneys, Todd Blanche, John Sauer, and Emile Beauvais. Importantly, all 3 of these men were federal prosecutors for at least a few years previously. So they know what it's like to serve as a federal prosecutor and represent the interests of the American people, not of a president and not of any former defendant you may have represented. So Donald Trump, I believe, made the calculation that no, these guys have been going into court, putting all this nonsense in legal filings for me, fighting hard for me. I expect loyalty from them when I make them my DOJ officials, and they're going to do what I tell them to do, prosecute who I tell them to prosecute, decline to prosecute my friends and criminal associates. I'm going to be able to push them around, lead them by the nose, and they will obey my unlawful orders. They will do the wrong thing if I tell them to. The open question, will they? Will these 3 former federal prosecutors continue to do their former client's bidding, Donald Trump, or will they step back into their role as representing the people of the United States as high DOJ government officials? I expect them to. The American people have every right to expect them to, because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.